So in the next 45, 55 minutes, whatever it is, I'm going to work through and discuss processing loss. So if at any point in time you have a comment or a question, don't be afraid to place it in chat, and I'll check that every so often. I want to make sure that your comments or questions are heard or answered. And then likely for those folks who end up watching this recording later, maybe they're thinking some of the same things that you are. So whether you're joining this live or whether you're listening to the recording, welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. There was another webinar, October 23rd, that we did with regards to finding similarities and communicating across generations. That is on the homepage of my website. It's also on my YouTube channel if you want to watch that recording. I have another webinar coming up on December 17th, and that one's going to be about developing professional emotional intelligence. So if that's interesting to you, just keep an eye out for those things on my social channels or check out my website. I want to begin today's discussion with loss with a quote from the author of Eat, Pray, Love. And the quote is, "Deep grief sometimes is almost like a specific location, a coordinate on a map of time. When you are standing in the forest of sorrow, you cannot imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. And now you've moved on. But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this will bring hope." And the reason why I chose that quote is that each of us is going to experience loss and suffering in our own unique ways. There isn't one way to experience it. All of us is going to have a different circumstance. But if we have people around us who have been through something similar or know a process or can help us work through the emotions and feelings, it becomes much easier to process the loss with intention. And if you follow Esther Hicks online, she's an inspirational speaker and author, and she often talks about contrast in her videos. And what I think she means by contrast is this idea that when we lose something or we kind of long to have something specifically, that reminds us about what it is that we genuinely want. So the lack of something or the loss of something reminds us about something we're working towards or that we want to have. So just be mindful that the contrast and the loss is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a reminder about some of the things that we're possibly working to. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen a couple things with regards to me. I'm a speaker, leadership consultant, and executive coach. And my work is really about guiding leaders and organizations through their biggest challenges and trying to find a way to not only move them, but also their teams from disengagement to clarity. And some cases, moving people from a place of fear to confidence. And we'll talk about those 3 steps today. And my personal mission is really about unlocking human potential. And I value things around authenticity and growth and spirituality. Those things are really important to me. If you visit michaelsseaver.com, you'll see 200 blogs. You're going to see hundreds of media publications. On the homepage, we just added a slider towards the bottom with videos from podcasts and other things that I've done recently. So maybe there's something there that is interesting to you. But there's a number of things on the site there that might be of interest or help trying to create this repository that can help people through anything with regards to finding their life's purpose and moving to a place of feeling aligned meaningfully. So what I want to do today is ask you just a couple of questions through a product called Mentimeter. So keep your phones close by. But I also want to tell you just a little bit about my story. I'm going to share a few pieces of interesting research that I found in the last couple of months that may or may not help us understand stress and loss in a new way. I'm going to share with you a process for moving through loss, meaning in that box, I place some links that you can then gain access to PDFs and other documents that help you through this, that you can take home and do something meaningful with later. And then do a little bit around how do we find alignment through some of those really challenging or tough moments. So we'll cover those things in the next 45 or 50 minutes or so. So what I want to do first is have you grab your mobile devices, and I'm going to have you go to a website. It's called Menti. So if you go, you can see it at the top center of the screen, www.menti.com, MENTI.com. And when you get to that, you will be prompted to enter in the 7-digit code, and it's 8625650. After you hit submit, this question, what loss did you experience in 2020, will pop up. And please know that your responses here are completely anonymous. Not even I can see who is saying what. So if you feel called to, go ahead and answer this question in up to 250 characters. What were some of the losses that you may or may not have experienced this year? I definitely concur with the finance piece because that was a big thing for me this year. Lots of business friendships, hugs and or bonus potential, right? So with everything changing and shifting in our society this year, especially mid-March, there's been so many little things that we've lost with regards to work. There's another one that just came through on the left-hand side, face-to-face connection with our colleagues. Maybe you and your spouse, husband had some trips planned and all of a sudden they're no longer there or available. Travel opportunities, I definitely agree with that because my partner Tiffany and I were scheduled to go to Belize on March 17th of this year. And 24 hours prior to us getting on that flight, we did have to cancel and get our money back. So I think some of the things that you are experiencing are quite similar to what I experienced, especially as this year has come, which is businesses being adjusted in some way financially, but also this idea around not being able to travel or do some of the things that we used to find as being comforting to us. So thank you for responding to that question. I'm going to shift back to the slides and kind of filter some of these things in. So my story, and you can see this picture that was taken in May of 2019, so about a year and a half ago, and I'm at a small grasshopper. You can kind of see it there. It's been resting on the window. It was resting on the window during a particular point in time. So the way that it kind of worked itself out was in late 2018, I was really struggling in a romantic relationship that I was in, and I didn't really know where to take it, what to do with it. There were some things that I was wanting that the partner couldn't necessarily provide, and the same from me to her. So we ended up choosing to end a 7-year relationship, which was an incredibly challenging and difficult moment. But it also happened to coincide with her daughter, who I refer to as my stepdaughter. Her name's Aaliyah. She went to college basically at the exact same time. And so both my partner and I were going through this process of ending the relationship, but also watching our stepdaughter go off to college, and then having to move from our nice, cozy home into much smaller, much different apartments. And so for months and months and months in the latter part of 2018 and into early 2019, the emotions that I was feeling associated with that loss and with those changes, I wasn't necessarily doing a great job of processing them or understanding them, but they were a really important part of my journey. So fast forward a couple of months into 2019, and I had made the choice or the decision to try to find a way to launch a workshop series. And here the picture on the left is me delivering the third workshop in 2019. It's May 2019. And what was really bothering me is that I was still kind of coming down from the low of being not in the relationship and having my daughter go off to college and all the things associated with the loss of that relationship. But now all of a sudden, this podcast that I had launched really wasn't gaining a whole lot of traction. The workshops, they weren't necessarily taking off the way that I was hoping that they would. And the amount of coaching clients that I had was dwindling. So the impact to my financial books were really, really tough. And it really put me into a bit of a spiral downwards. And it was funny to me that this picture would be taken of me at one of the lowest points of my life, and that would be pointing at grasshopper. American theology and history. Grasshoppers are known as being symbols of good luck or someone's capacity to advance forward or opportunities or coming success. And I couldn't at that time correlate how the metaphysical meaning of that grasshopper was going to impact me at that particular point in time, because I was at such a rough place emotionally. So one of the things that became really relevant May, June, July of last year was that I needed to be able to take a step back and slow down. And I think the grasshopper kind of was telling me that metaphysically, that I needed to slow down and get a little bit more into flow for my life's actual purpose. And so I began to study what NASA calls the precession of the equinoxes. And so every about 2,165 years, the North and South Pole on Earth, they shift just a little bit. And so there are some theologians that suggest that there are different meanings and purposes and emotions that are associated with these transitions and times. And what I had done in my research was find that prior to November 11th, 2011, we were in what they refer to as the age of Pisces. And the age of Pisces is a time in human history that was really heavily focused on hierarchy and power and believing in some external thing to yourself. And their suggestion is that when we made this transition after November 11th, 2011, into the age of Aquarius, which what we're in now for the next 2,165 years, is that we're moving into a place where we're networked, information is really decentralized, and we can move to this place of knowing that the answers are inside of ourselves. So I didn't think it circumstantial or coincidental that I would have this really tough end to 2018, but then walk into early 2019 and the tough situation would continue going. So as I took the summer of 2019 to be still, be quiet, learn more about these things, and set things up, what I thought was going to be really successful for the first part of 2020, as you all know, March 2020 happened, and many of the things that I had set up to make my business successful in my own way became irrelevant really quickly in mid-March. So we had to pivot. Many of you had to pivot, but I still felt similar feelings of loss that I had felt in 2018 and 2019. But the blessing that came out of some of the things that we've had to adjust or tweak this year is that I've got a brand new website, was able to write a book, and it's really helped me to see my world in a different way. And I hope that some of the things that exist in the book or that exist in webinars like this can genuinely be really, really helpful to you. So what I've learned is that when you love something unconditionally and you change the how, or you surrender the how, sometimes things can actually turn out better than you had previously imagined that they possibly could. And so without these losses, I wouldn't have been encouraged to read books, follow specific people on social media, watch particular videos, re-engage the game of golf, go for hiking, spend as much time in nature as I did, because if it wasn't for the loss, I might not have done those things. So each of you probably has your own respectful story of loss and how things have affected you. Sharing mine to just give you a little bit of courage to share yours freely with those people around you, because even though each of our stories is going to be unique, there can be certain things that we feel or experience that might be similar from person to person. So I'm going to ask you to grab your phones one more time. And let's see. The question that I'm going to pop up on the screen now is on a scale of basically 1 to 10. How stressed do you feel? So 1 being low, 10 being high. And there's no right or wrong answer. Again, your answer is anonymous. It's just what level of stress are you feeling right now? Okay, so some diversity here in our responses. Anybody from this place of 2, I don't feel necessarily terribly stressed, all the way up to 7. So 1, 6, and a couple 7s. So fair amount of stress. And so thank you for responding to that. I'm going to pop the slides back up on the screen. And what I want to point out is a couple of things that I've been finding with regards to research. And when I was thinking about this and doing research for this webinar over the last couple of weeks, there are many things that can cause stress, as you're aware, but I went to the Cleveland Clinic's website to learn a little bit more about what they believe stress to be or how it affects the body. And their definition and the way that they describe it on their website is that stress is the body's physical, mental, or emotional reaction to an external or to change happening to us. And oftentimes the result of stress, according to the Cleveland Clinic, is high blood pressure, headaches, chest pain, panic attacks, depression, and other kind of physiological responses. And so the point that I want to make in that is that we all experience stress, and we all experience some of these health effects that come from the stress. So finding ways to be able to mitigate them is important. And so based on the responses that you just gave, right, at least 2 of us are relatively stressed, and 1 was at number 6. So we're in a place where stress is important to us or impacting us. So I want to give you a couple pieces of research here to help support this, and so that you can understand not only for yourself, but also for those around you, how stress is possibly impacting us. And so in April, May of this year, just after the pandemic had started, the American Psychological Association did a survey of more than 3,000 adults. It was conducted by the Harris Poll, and they ended up publishing this in something called the Stress in America 2020 report. And you can see that the average American during the pandemic, especially April, May, was feeling a level of stress of 5.9. All right. So for those of you who answered 6 or 7, pretty much on par with what the vast majority of Americans are feeling and have continued to feel. So if you happen to have a child under the age of 18 in your home, the stress actually goes up by an additional point, up to 6.7. So the stress that we are feeling, or the stress that our colleagues are feeling, is certainly profound. It's definitely going to be there. And what do we do to help ourselves or help one another through it? And you can see from the other stats, 71% of parents, were really interested in how are they going to manage distance or online learning. And I just asked you the question on Mentimeter about what are those things that you feel were a loss for you. And a couple of you mentioned finances. And so certainly the economy and what it's going to do or become is another significant source of stress for Americans. Another study that was done at roughly the same time from the University of North Carolina and Harvard Medical School. This one was done in the second half of May. More than 1,500 adults were surveyed. And what they found was that in May, right, so only just a couple months after the pandemic had started, 55% of the respondents were more stressed than they were just 4 or 5 months earlier. 66% of the respondents were really stressed about the health and safety of somebody, and 50 to 60% were concerned about finances, or they were frustrated that they couldn't participate in usual activities that they would, right? So breaking those habits and breaking those routines, creating that sense of loss was pretty challenging. And we've got some data here to support that from some pretty well-known brands. Now, when it comes to University of Connecticut, again, doing kind of the same research and trying to understand what is it that's happening from stress, there are different triggers to stress for each of us. 97% of people felt stressed by reading or hearing about the contagiousness of COVID, or 80% people felt uncertain about the duration of the social distancing requirements. One of the things that really came out of this study that I think is important for our discussion is that when we try to process loss emotionally, what the University of Connecticut found was that if a person was more financially stable, they were able to cope with the loss or the change or the stress by interacting or doing their hobbies again, by participating in their normal activities and their normal hobbies, or they were able to seek some sort of emotional support from somebody around them, right? So they dealt with the stress and the loss in a relatively constructive way. But if you or someone that is in your world, maybe someone at work, or maybe you have a loved one at home that is a little bit younger, or maybe is a little bit more financially unstable, somebody who's financially unstable tended to cope with the loss or the stress with substance abuse or disengaging from society altogether. And so these are the folks, of course, that we want to be really mindful of, is to make sure that we don't forget about them. So think about the members of your team. If they happen to be a little bit younger, or if you know that they're struggling just a little bit for money, there is the likely outcome that they're going to deal with the loss or the pressure or the stress by using a substance or by disengaging. And so we want to make sure that we keep them engaged in a meaningful way. So mental health strategies or prevention strategies become really critical. And that's why I developed this process and this handout to try to help folks who might be feeling something that they just don't really know how to process. Now, the last piece of research that I'll share with you comes from, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, MIT Sloan and their management review. One of their writers basically did an interview of a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton, and so in she surveyed more than 3,200 employees in 7 different industries, including technology, utilities, and finance. And so employees who reported being from a stronger culture of what they referred to as companionate love had more job satisfaction, more commitment, and greater personal accountability. And the effect was equally strong for men and women. So what Segal found in her research is that emotions, the same way that the cold or the flu or a virus could theoretically get passed from person to person, they have data to show that emotions get passed from person to person to person the same way. So when we feel something, stress, we just went through a loss, we're feeling pressure in some way, there is the likelihood that we could take it either virtually or in person to the office or to those people around us. We literally catch emotions from the people around us. So finding ways to mitigate the feelings of loss or the feelings of stress or pressure become really important. And what I believe in all of my years of serving as an executive coach, and some of the things that Segal, publishes in her work, is that processing loss and working through it safely is oftentimes as simple as being near emotionally balanced people, or trying to remove yourself from negative situations, or finding those people in your life, coaches, mentors, or professionals that can help you process and talk through the emotions safely. And so humans are designed to work in groups, right? We're designed to feel accepted and be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So when we experience loss, we have to surround ourselves with those people that can genuinely help us in some meaningful way. And that's where I think this research is so important, because it's the first time that I've ever read that emotional culture is contagious. Now, what Segal was talking about with regards to companionate love, please don't mistake that for romantic love. Companionate love is just kind of imagine it as being like employee engagement, in that you've created such a great safe place as a leader that people genuinely feel safe to be vulnerable, to take risks, and to be their most authentic self at the workplace. So if we create those cultures of companionate love, people are going to be much more likely to want to be with us being a leader, or to work with our organization, or to feel safe to be their most authentic self showing up day to day. So stress, not only from the folks on the call today, but also from some of the research that's come from pretty big brands across America, to Segal's research that show that if someone in our life is processing loss, there's the probability that we could feel some of that too. But maybe we can also take a little bit of the onus of the responsibility to pass some of our optimism to them to help them through whatever it is that they're experiencing. So I'm going to ask you another Mentimeter question. So if you grab your phone again, the next question is, how many times each month do you celebrate your wins? And the wins can be personal, they can be professional, but the options that I put up there are anywhere from 0 all the way up to 7+. So go ahead and take a second to answer that question. It brings me tremendous joy that there are people on the call that are celebrating at least 7 times in a month. So that makes me feel great, because many of the organizations I provide consulting or coaching to, these things, as far as I know, aren't done by the leadership, or they're not baked into the culture of the organization itself. So kudos to you when you do that and celebrate in that way that many times per month. I think that's great. So what I want to share with you, and I'll make sure that this particular PDF, once we get towards the end of the presentation, I'll put a link to it so that you can download it yourself. But what I want to describe to you is the processing loss, the process that I try to walk people through. And I've done this with a couple different organizations and people. So what you see on your screen is just page 1 of 2 of a PDF that I hand to leaders or to people. And it's designed to be a 3-step process that can help people kind of work through different things to help them feel safe and balanced. So for probably since 2008, 2009, I've been trying to keep an eye on or follow kind of a Buddhist approach to life. And in kind of the Buddhism approach to life, they talk about something called the 4 noble truths. And number 1 is there's truth in suffering. Number 2, there's truth the cause of suffering. Number 3, there's truth in that can end suffering. And number 4 is that there is truth in finding the path that leads to the end of suffering. So for thousands of years, right, regardless of what religion you subscribe to, there's this belief that part of the human experience is that we have to be challenged by or go through things. So whether it's suffering, or maybe you've read Joseph Campbell's A Hero with 1,000 Faces, and you learn about the hero's journey, which always talks about, there's some point in a person's life where they kind of drop down and experience a hardship. Many of our most favorite movies that you see today focus on using the 16-step process that the hero's journey taught people years and years ago. But point is that the idea of loss and the idea of wanting something better for our life is quite normal for all humans. It's something we shouldn't try to stop. We should try to focus on, just allow for it to occur. So another thing that I'm going to place in the chat once we get closer to the end of our time together is something from the University of Tennessee, and it's called What is Your ACE Score? And ACE is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's a 10-question set that you can answer just in your mind mentally, or share it with those people around you. Because the University of Tennessee, in their research in their psychology department, found that that what happens in our youngest years and any adverse child experience that we might have ends up guiding a lot of our responses to loss as we navigate life later. So if you understand what those factors are from your earlier years, it does help to notify us how we may or may not respond today, even as adults 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. So I'll share that in the chat once we get close to the end as well too. But each of us has lost something in some way, shape, or form. You know, it could be daily habits and routines. It could be the things that we did to work out. It could be we used to really love to watch sports, and all of a sudden we can't. And I have had, you know, friends and colleagues and people at work that have actually lost loved ones this year. So loss can be a number of things for people. But what I want to call out here about this 3-step process is I'll start at number 1. And what I think about this is that I asked the question about celebrating wins, and you can see that it's the first question under section number 1. And the question, of course, is what wins, blessings, or cool things happened for you in the last 7 days? And the reason why I ask this of my clients, or I ask my clients to ask it of their staff, is that what it does in the human brain physiologically is that it releases serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and sometimes endorphins. And so in every meeting that I have with the client, or that when I'm helping organizations set up meeting structures, we try to begin all meetings with the celebration of wins. So we're not minimizing the loss or the feelings associated with the loss. What we're doing is reminding ourselves consistently, daily, possibly weekly, that we still have many great things in our lives to be thankful for. So it's important to remember that, or to make that a part of the discussion as well. So after you, or possibly someone on your team, has had a chance to answer that first question and give 3 to 5 examples, the second question in step number 1 is what has been emotionally challenging? And that can be anything from the loss of a loved one, to not being able to watch your favorite sports team, to not being able to go out to restaurants or in public the way that you used to. There's any number of things that it can be. Or perhaps, you know, your child was able to go to a school in person, and all of a sudden that they can't. It doesn't matter what the thing is. The most important piece is that we get it out of our system, because emotions are effectively energy in motion. And so we have to find a way to release those feelings as much as we possibly can. Otherwise, they get kind of stuck in our body. And what the Cleveland Clinic talked about is that when stress gets bottled up in our body for long periods of time, it ends up triggering us into having physiological effects that we would end up suffering from later physically. So we want to try to avoid those. So the third question under step 1 is from page 3, what zone are you in? And I'm going to address that here just in a minute, because I'm going to show you page 2 of the handout. So hold on that for just a sec. But the fourth question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your stress level? So each of you has already answered that from today already. But the reason why I want anybody to be able to respond to that is oftentimes, what is their gut feeling? What does their intuition tell them about that right then and now? And then how do they go down to step number 2? And based on the number response that they gave, there's a series of things that they can do to try to find balance. So talking about wins, being very clear about what it is that we're feeling emotionally challenged by, recognizing our behavior and what zone we're in, which we'll talk about in the fourth area, which is how high is stress level. It's important to get that kind of gut reaction or instinct, because then we can know how to mitigate the stress in the coming hours or days. And then the fifth question is, what might you do to move to the next zone? And when you see the next slide, that question will make more sense too. So step number 2, when I think about this, is, okay, if we look at the third question from step number 1, what zone are we in? Fourth question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is our stress level? Here is what we can do. So if we recognize that we're feeling or experiencing a loss or stress or some sort of a feeling, how can we then find a way to be able to mitigate it? So that's what step 2 is. So if someone happened to, answer that they were feeling a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that's great. You can see that there are some mental and or physical solutions that might help you to release the stress and start to work through the loss with intention. So it could be anything from meditation or prayer. I use an app called Insights Timer every morning for 20 minutes. And sometimes it's just me sitting alone in quiet, or sometimes it's following a guided meditation. Sometimes it's doing a particular yoga flow. But when I'm feeling stressed, using the Insights Timer app for 20 minutes each morning has been a really big blessing for me. And you can see other things there. Maybe you like cards, playing cards, or maybe it's board games, or maybe it's a mobile device app. I love to be able to read at night. So once it gets to be 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to pop up a book on my phone and start to read. And that helps me to relieve stress at the end of the day. Maybe it does for you too. Before we started to record our time together, we talked a little bit about, are we going for walks? Are we getting out into nature? Are we going for hikes? What does that look like? But in order to get the body back to a place of homeostasis and to release some of that stress and some of the feelings of loss, if it's a breathing technique, and I think it was Denise that mentioned the idea of a gong bath, right? Those things can really help us to get the stress out of our body meaningfully. Maybe we like to hike, maybe we run, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's an at-home workout, whatever that thing is. It's just key that when you're feeling that specific emotion and you haven't quite worked through the loss or the stress yet, it's key that we change the environment or change our breathing pattern or change something about our thought process to move us away from the stress into a place of feeling more balanced. Okay. So if you happen to answer 6, 7, or 8, right, and feeling that stress, this is where we want to ramp up and not just do something alone as we would have done in steps 1 through 5, but we really want to get someone else involved. So if someone's stress level is 6, 7, or 8, we want to make sure that they or you have a chance to be able to talk to someone, whether it's a professional, whether it's a family member, colleague, counselor, mentor, coach, whatever it is. And if we think back to some of the psychology research that I just shared from, especially the University of Connecticut, is that if we don't have someone to talk to, we're going to disengage. But if we do have someone to talk to, we're going to get through the emotion fairly quickly. So if you or someone on your team is at that level 6, 7, or 8, let's try to get them in front of someone to talk to about their feelings and emotions as quickly as possible. Now, if anybody around you answers 9 or 10 on a scale of 10, this is where we want to get somebody with really extreme authority in place, if you will, whether it's 911 or whether it's calling an employee assistance plan or whether it's calling a medical doctor. That is really important kind of final step if somebody is at that place of possibly considering self-harm or is really struggling with what it is that they're experiencing. So I like to call this mass customization. And what I mean by that is that there are a variety of ways in which we're going to experience loss, but each of us, depending on our experiences and our adverse childhood experiences, we're going to process the loss differently. But if we have a process, these 3 steps you see on your screen, we can mass customize the response to the person and what he or she is feeling. So instead of just subscribing one specific thing that everybody does, let's customize it to the person and their needs in the moment on the spot. And step 3, if you choose to do this, this is something that, for me, I use apps like World Numerology or The Pattern or CoStar, and they give me just a reminder of what the universe or God or whatever your belief pattern is, just gives me a reminder about we're connected to something far bigger than ourselves. And apps like that help to make me feel connected to what's happening in society or what's happening on Earth. So if you take these 3 steps and you do them once a week, once every other week for yourself or for someone on your team, it becomes far easier to make sure that the law that person experienced or you might have experienced, that we can work so that we don't have to keep answering that we're feeling stress at an incredibly high level. So my belief is that we're still going to see a number of things change, throughout the remainder of this year societally, and definitely the first 3 or 4 months of next year. So how do we make sure that we have these processes in place in a safe way to allow us to work through them safely? So the next slide is the actual 3 phases that I was just talking about. And this is where you can see there's a lot of text on the screen, so I want to make sure that I get you the PDF. But in step number 1, right, we're asking ourselves, or we're asking somebody around us for them to identify what zone they're in. And you can see the zones at the top: fear, learning, or growth. And these are designed to mirror William Bridges and his book, Managing Transitions. So if you've never read Managing Transitions by William Bridges, it's a really, really good read because it talks about the 3 phases of change and how do we release or shed a part of ourselves, move into, in this case, the neutral, the learning zone, and be able to kind of test some things and try some things. And then once we get really, really solid and good about what it is we want to do, we can move into the growth zone. So when we're helping ourselves or we're helping somebody through any type of a loss, more likely than not, they're going to be starting on the left-hand side of the screen. They're going to be starting in the fear zone. And so each of the blue boxes is meant to just be a little bit of a header for some of the things that you see as you move right across the screen. So as an example, the description box, the very top left box, this is just helping you to understand what each of the zones is. So the fear zone, somebody is in this place right now where they're trying to end and let go of an emotion or a loss or a person or a habit or a ritual, whatever that is. They're trying to end and let go, but they don't know how because they're feeling shock, right? They're feeling uncertainty. And that's important to recognize and understand, is that we can't make them not feel the feeling because they're going to, but we can start to over time allow for the reaction to the emotion or the feeling to be different. So if somebody is in the learning zone, right, they're in a neutral phase, they're having a bit of an identity crisis, but what they're really doing is they're testing and trying things, piloting, beta testing, if you will, to move to a place of saying, how do I feel safe and myself authentically to let this piece go? And what is it that I'm going to welcome into my life to replace the thing that is gone? And so they're having an identity crisis, not knowing exactly what to do next. And that's a-okay. It's a time to test and try things. So once we get people into the growth zone on the far right, they're automatically trying solutions and finding the solution that best serves them. And likely when someone's in the growth zone, they're also helping to move other people around them from fear to learning to growth too. So if you're unsure, talking to yourself or talking to somebody around you, what zone you're in, the second line, actions I'm taking right now, is designed to help someone see what zone they're in by the physical actions that they're taking. So if they're unwilling to tell you how they're feeling, or you're unsure of which zone you're in, the actions I'm taking right now are just physical manifestations of what it is that the person might be, what zone they might be in. So if somebody is in the fear zone, they're going to panic buy unnecessary items. They're going to blame others. They're going to hoard things they don't necessarily need. They're going to create stories based on rumors. They're going to share negative emotion with people around them, right? So if you see those behaviors in anybody, right, they're probably feeling fear. But if you see somebody who is in the center in the learning zone and they're using their time a little bit differently, they're able to talk about and identify their emotions, they're searching for new opportunities and testing things and trying things, that means they're learning and they're in a good place. Or if you're over on the right in the growth zone, somebody's living in the now, they're trusting the process, they're able to live their life's mission, they're sharing hope and guiding others in some meaningful way, right? So those are easy to see behaviors in a person, and that will help you to understand what zone they're in. So the emotional challenge row, if you will, is just like, here's the emotion that they're feeling and what it is that they're trying to cling to from the past. So just being mindful of is that you're going to see specific actions from them. How can you connect their action to an emotional challenge they're having in awareness of what that is? So what we want to do is start to move a little bit further down this chart and say, okay, if we know that they're taking specific actions and they're having a specific emotional challenge, how can we start to get them to think about moving from left to right? And the way that we do that is the question row and the questions that I placed in that row specifically. And so each of the questions under fear, learning, and growth are designed to make people become really aware of who they are in that zone, and then to get them start to think about how can they process the loss well so that they can start moving to the next zone to the right. Okay, that's the point of it. So one of the things that becomes really critical is that how are we communicating to ourselves or to those around us that we're helping to guide, is that there are specific things that help to really influence a person to make them feel safe to make the jump to that next zone. So asking the right questions under the self-reflection row or the key to influencing row, if we can give people specific facts and data and logical process, that's going to take them from fear and move them into learning. Or if we give people certain types of reassurances and clarity and we give them a plan that they can follow, they're probably going to move from learning into growth. Or if they're already in growth, giving them some sort of a vision and stories will allow for them to then take that story to others and help guide others really meaningfully and powerfully to where it is that they're going. So as a coach, as a leader, as a person, the very bottom row about offering clarity through communication, this is the way that you can guide another person from loss and being in fear to moving them over into learning or growth. Okay. So those are things that you can do that will help them to feel safe to be able to matriculate from left to right on this chart. And again, I'll put this PDF in the chat box so that you can have it. I'll also make sure it gets emailed to everybody in the next 24 to 48 hours. But the point of this PDF is that I believe strongly that really big change is still coming in the next 5, 6, 7 months. And the way that we experience loss is going to be different maybe than it has been the last few months. But what we have to become great at doing is how do we learn new habits, unlearn old emotional responses, and relearn, specific ways of being that are much more in line with where society is going. And so we have to remain positive, we have to remain engaged, and we have to remain happy. We have to make sure in order to stay at that level, we have to process loss or move through those things relatively quickly. So I'm going to put another Mentimeter question. So if you want to snag your phone one more time. And the question is, have you ever completed a reflected best self assessment? And what this really effectively is that is someone in your network or a group of people in your network have shared with you what you believe or what they believe your strengths are. So have you ever done a reflected best self assessment? Okay, so we're basically even right now. At least 3 of us have said, yes, we've done it, or 3 we have not. So in either case, it's a really effective tool to help us see ourselves in a new light. So thank you everybody for responding to and answering that. I'll talk about that just a little bit more here in the last 10 minutes or so that we have together. So a reflected best self initially came out of a Harvard article in 2006. And I think it's been adapted and utilized by many practitioners since. But reflected best self is effectively reaching out to 25 or 50 people in your respective networks and asking them to give you what they believe your number 1 or number 2 strength is, and to offer you an example of when they saw you live that strength. And so if you do that, and I've done it with a number of clients to a lot of success, is that you're going to get 50 to 100 to 125 responses back. And if you really look across the responses that you get, you're going to find patterns. And those patterns are really important because they identify your major strengths or themes of your major strengths that can help you know where to redistribute time. Because when we're processing loss, we know that emotions are contagious and we don't want to stay in that place of emotional contagion where everybody's feeling negative. We want to move to a place of optimistic positivity. And the way that we do that is distributing our time into things that are much more happy, optimistic, or allow us to use our strengths. So in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to share a couple of things that might help you find alignment to help move past the loss as safely or as well as we can. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner under alignment, oftentimes with clients, I'll ask them to write a personal mission statement. And whatever that one sentence statement is, we want them to take as much action in alignment with that mission. And so whenever they're confronted with a tough decision or choice, we just ask them to compare the decision or choice against the mission. Say, am I going to be allowed to use my mission or do my mission more through this? If the answer is yes, then great, do it. If the answer is no, that might lead you down the path of having to process loss. So we can avoid it. The same thing with behavioral profile or motivators. If you've ever done DISC or Myers-Briggs or Emergenetics or 4 Windows or StrengthsFinder 2.0, there's so many personality assessments that exist out there. If you can do things day to day where you're allowed to be your authentic self and communicate in a way that's really authentic to you, you're genuinely going to be happier. So finding roles and finding friends that allow you to communicate the way you prefer to, it's going to make sure that we don't put ourselves down the path of having to process loss. Core value is also another one. This is something we don't really talk about a lot in society, whether in K through 12 or in university settings, but I think it's becoming a bigger part of society where if we take action in alignment with our core values, we're much more likely to be happy. And oftentimes disagreements between people that can cause loss or cause stress are because one person violated another person's core values, right? So just being aware of what those things are is critical. So in the center there, energy, and I mean this relatively loosely, is that when we are trying to overcome a loss and we're trying to stay in a place of positivity, we want to make sure that we're around people that exude that optimism. So whenever we're finishing an interaction with the person, how do we ask ourselves, did that person extract my energy? Did they take my energy? Did they make me feel sad? Or did they gift me energy, right? Did they make me feel optimistic, positive? Did they make me feel good about myself? Whatever that is. And so if at all possible, right, to work through a loss faster, make sure that you're spending more time with people that genuinely uplift you and gift you energy. The second question there about flow, this comes from a Hungarian psychologist. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he wrote a book called Flow. And it really just means is that when we're doing something that we love so much that we lose track of time when we're doing it, that means we're in flow. And so the rest of the world just shuts off. We're learning, we're having fun, we're really enjoying something. That will really help us to matriculate through loss better, is if we can do things each day where we genuinely feel that we're learning and in a state of flow. So something to consider. In the upper right-hand corner, this idea of selecting projects. And what I mean by that is that when we are making tough decisions and choices and trying to stay in a place of positivity, I'm really focused in on asking these two questions when I say yes or no. When organizations reach out to me about providing a service to them, I ask myself these two questions about whether or not I want them as a client, or whether I'm willing to go to dinner with a person, or fill in the blank. But the two basic questions are, is where, if we're choosing where we're going to distribute time, what skills am I going to learn? Because if you're not going to learn something, it may be a less interesting activity. Or is it possible I'm going to form a really meaningful long-term relationship? And if that's the case, then it's really good for you to consider doing that thing, because you're likely going to be able to move from that neutral zone, right, the learning zone, into the growth zone more quickly. Now, in the lower left-hand corner and in the reflection box, I've got lots and lots of stories about clients who have kept gratitude and pain journals. Pain journals is a little bit more interesting because it's not something we talk a lot about in society, but it's really helpful when you think about the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, or you think about the hero's journey and moving, kind of through the valley of despair, if you will, is that when we journal, whether for gratitude or for pain, what we're really doing is we're collecting data. And the data about our emotions is really critical for us to have a deeper understanding and meaning about those adverse childhood experiences, or about those things that shaped us as time has passed. So if you ever want data on yourself, whether it's reflected best self or whether it's a journal that you keep about you, it's really critical that you get that. So of course you can keep a 360, you can do performance reviews, you can do all that stuff. All of those things are there. But the key is looking at the data and finding the patterns across it. Okay, we got to find the patterns across the data. So bottom center there, mentors and coaches. This is a big thing, is that if you know of any person in your life that has already processed a big loss, surrounding yourself by individuals like that is absolutely critical, because they're going to have effectively shortcuts to be able to help you to get to where it is that you need to go. So having close helps tremendously in making sure that we're processing loss well and fully. So who is it that has already done what I'm about to do? Or who is it that is really emotionally intelligent and asks a lot of the right questions? So if we have those individuals around us, that becomes far simpler. Now, when we're moving into the third zone, the growth zone, this is where we really want to make sure that we're taking action and helping others to take action too. I'm a big believer that whatever challenge we went through at an earlier stage in our life, that at some point we overcome it. We learn a process for overcoming that loss or that challenge. But the highest and best use of our life for the years that follow are to help other people overcome that exact same challenge for themselves. So if we've experienced a loss, the thing that's going to heal us the most deeply is to help other people navigate that loss too. Right? It's critical that we see the connection. We've experienced something, we overcame it, we learn more and at a deeper level and contribute more meaningfully to society when we help others go through that as well. So don't be afraid to beta test some things or try to help other people in some meaningful way through things. You'll probably learn a little bit more about yourself and really genuinely advance somebody exactly when they need it. A couple more things here, and then we'll close up, is another couple things about finding alignment. If you've never done, on the far left-hand corner there, an emotional intelligence assessment, there are many that exist out there. There's a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and I'll probably reference it in next month's webinar. Travis Bradberry and Gene Greaves wrote this book in 2009, and it's a great book because it offers an actual EQ assessment, but it also offers 30 or 40 different methods by which you can improve your emotional intelligence. And the reason that's important is because for the last basically 40 years, through Daniel Goleman and through Bradberry and Greaves and others, is that what people have found is that people with higher levels of emotional intelligence, they can process the loss and integrate its learning faster. They're able to finish tasks and become more productive faster. They're genuinely physically healthier, and they're actually able to climb corporate ladders faster. And that to me seemed a bit odd when I first heard it, but it made a lot of sense when I started to think about when you climb corporate ladders, your capacity to influence and persuade somebody is your most valuable skill set, right? And the way that this happens is that we build emotional intelligence through understanding the suffering and the loss and the stress and being able to process it and help others process it too. Maybe it's time management, finding some alignment and processing loss. Maybe it's time management. Maybe early in the morning, you get a really difficult project done right away so that the stress is gone. Or if you're struggling to stay focused, for every 60 minutes in the day, you spend 45 minutes just doing the work really focused and really hard. But you spend the last 15 minutes of that 60 minutes just releasing, going for a walk, breathing activity, whatever that thing is, that will help tremendously. Or maybe it's temptation bundling, which is promising yourself that you're going to do something really hard today in processing the loss, but you're automatically going to reward yourself right thereafter with something that you've been wanting for a while. Or perhaps processing the loss and kind of moving and finding alignment with where you're going. It's about setting different goals, and it's about, setting goals that are very metrics or SMART goals, and that we're going to move from our current state X to a new version of us Y by a specific date when. And that can be personal goals, that can be professional, it can be a relationship. There's any number of ways that we can set those things up, but putting metrics and accountability around them genuinely matters a lot. So I'll ask you one more polling question from Mentimeter, and then we'll wrap up. And this question is, what learning from the last 50 minutes or so was most interesting to you? You can freeform your response. You can answer multiple times. Just want to see what were some of the key takeaways you had. Okay, so one that's come in so far is the idea of celebrating wins, which is obviously a big one because of the chemicals that our brain releases in the celebrating of them. There's a comment on the left about ages of Pisces and Aquarius. I can send you additional information if you have an interest in that. Just email me and I'll make sure that you down in the center. Yes, there's always a way through loss. And there's a number of books, actually, I'll reference them right now. There's a couple that I had taken notes of. And one of the books that was really helpful for me in the last couple of years was a book called Option B. And it was written by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, who's a psychology professor at Wharton. Another one that I've not read, but I've heard good things about, is called It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And then there's a third one that popped up for me from some other folks around me. And it's a book by a lady named Lori Gottlieb, and it's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. So if you do, or you're at this place of loss, of course, I'm going to give you this PDF, but maybe there's some additional stories and information in these books that could be really, really helpful. So looking at some of the comments here about, loss truly is universal. There is a way through it. There are really genuinely a ton of resources that can help you meaningfully. So thank you for keying in those responses. So this book, this is the draft or working cover, if you will, of a book that I'm going to publish on January 1st. I'm trying to publish it as an ebook and as an audiobook. And what it's going to be is basically similar to the 3 phases that we just talked about in processing loss. But under each of the 3 phases, I have 3 processes for a total of 9 processes. And it's really about how do we not only, yes, process loss, but move a person to a place of being able to transition from believing that all of their life's answers come from outside themselves to really knowing they can uncover the answers inside themselves. And so it's kind of this age of Pisces movement into the age of Aquarius, where in the age of Pisces, the kind of the 2-word phrase of it was, I believe, right? Some other thing about life. Whereas in the age of Aquarius, where I think we're going as a society, is we're moving into a place called I know. And I really want people to trust their own intuition and their own guidance as they move to that really meaningfully. So we went through my story. We talked about some research. I'm going to share the processing loss document with you. But the action items on the right there that I want to talk really quick is that whatever your loss was, whatever it was that you learned from the loss, I believe that there are probably some people around you that can genuinely help you through the loss, really powerfully or meaningfully. So if you want to calculate your ACE score, I'll put the PDF, the link to the website in the chat here in a second. I would really encourage you to think about this PDF and start to, whether it's once a week or once every other week, using these steps really meaningfully for yourself or someone around you. Remember that emotions are contagious, and we're probably in this place as we're processing loss, let's try to find ways to spread joy too. And if you haven't used the apps called Pattern or CoStar or World Numerology, they've been incredibly helpful for me as I've gone through these things. So I'll read you one final quote, and then I'll put the slides into the chat. And the quote comes from Haruki Murakami, and it is, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. And that's what the storm's all about. So I've always loved that quote. So let me stop my screen share. Let me put a couple of links in the chat box. And thank you, everybody, for your participation today. If you have questions, whether you put them in chat or you want to unmute yourself and just share, that is a-okay too. Hang on, I'm going to try to put these links into the chat for you. Here's one about the ACE score, and then the PDF that I've been talking about and referencing with regards to processing loss. I'm going to put that one in now.
Michael, do you have that quote, that last quote? This is Denise.
Yeah, I'll send it in the email to you either this afternoon or tomorrow.
Love it. That was great.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll make sure that not only do you get the slides, I'll send you a link to the recording, but I'll put the 2 quotes in the email so that you can use it if you wish.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.